Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending our panel. I hope you can hear me okay. I think it should be fine. Yeah. So you can see some slight difference between the title we put in the journal presentation, what we are actually presenting, focusing today, because the title is basically related to our broader project that was funded by the British Academy, looking at patterns of online posting behaviors and looking at ideologies, narratives, and recruitment strategies. But what we are presenting today is specifically... All right, thank you. That looks better. I mean, you can dim it a little bit more if you think it's useful. Can you see okay? Is that... All right, okay, perfect. All right, so today we're talking about recruitment and specifically the language used in the context of recruitment across three broad ideological milieus. We're looking at far-right, Islamists, and eco-radicals. And obviously you will be able to see the results of the broader study in the, quite a few book chapters, journal articles, and the final report that are all coming up in the following months. So we're very excited. Okay, some clarifications and also aims of this study. We are not aiming to assess the threat or the risk of any of the groups included in this presentation. This is not really our job, but our job as academics is basically to provide results so that they can identify common recruitment strategies and ideological appeals across the ideologies and the case studies that we have mapped in our study. And also to add a systematic approach looking at how soft forms of recruitment were being used by nonviolent extremists online during during, and post-pandemic, because we're covering a period that goes from 2016 until 2021. So you can imagine how exciting the results would be. So we took three groups as case study. Our criteria were basically to include groups that were particularly active online over the period that we have explored, and groups that are posting borderline content. So again, content that is not violating any policy or any framework, any law, but that is strongly anti-government, anti-authority, anti-elite, targeting specific groups in the society, dehumanizing, and all other stuff that might be included in the broad definition of borderline fringe content. We looked at again, collective actors. We didn't look at individual actors, and we looked at mostly mainstream platforms, so Facebook and Twitter, but Britain First was deplatformed by both, so we had to look at Telegram. So Telegram stands as a bit of a more fringe platform in this context. And research questions specifically for this bit of the study were what narratives and forms of recruitment are used by nonviolent extremists to recruit members online. We also wanted to look if there were any similarities across the narratives explored, and specifically looking at the language. And also we wanted to monitor the trends longitudinally, because we explored this 5 years period. Our research method, as you can imagine, is a mixed method. We used computational approach, but also qualitative. So in terms of computational, we conducted a computational data collection, social media platforms. When I say we, it means us and the data science team at Anglo-Ruskin University, obviously, and they performed natural language processing, distributional semantics, and topic modeling. But as a qualitative scientist, I can say quite proudly that this couldn't happen without the qualitative codebook that obviously guided the whole research, and the terminology, the inclusion-exclusion criteria, the definition, and everything that we know that goes in a codebook. And as location, we chose the UK because obviously this is where we're based, and we had an interest in looking at the chapters of the group in the country, but we do acknowledge the international presence of some of the groups. So we came up with the following three categories and the related indicators. So we looked at hard recruitment being basically example of hard tactics that are quite direct, and they include some ideological, specifically branded words and activities. And some examples of indicators include protest, fight, attack, boycott, so oppose, so really a call for direct action, again, within the legal framework. Soft recruitments relates to soft tactics. They are not necessarily ideologically specific, and they can include hobbies, so activities that are not really related to any ideology. And so soft recruitment indicator include film, art, competition, social, eat, camp. So quite interesting to see as well. And then we also included the third category as general recruitment. That includes texts both covers soft and hard, but not related to any ideological connotation. So again, general language of inviting people to join. So meet, to come, join, and other really general forms of language. Now I'll stop here and I'll give the floor to Will to present the results, the fun part.
Thank you, Elisa. Yeah, so just to underscore, the kind of main justification for this research was kind of germinated and generated from some conversation with practitioners. I think there was a particular concern among practitioners about softer forms of recruitment during the pandemic period. So that's something we're trying to bottom out in this typology that we're using in terms of hard and soft. In terms of Britain First, out of the three groups, can say that they were by far the most active in recruiting. In terms of the terms surveyed. This might be also, to some extent, an artefact of the data. In terms of recruitment terms, that related to about 13,377 posts over the whole kind of time period, out of a kind of larger corpus of 29,000 posts. So it's just almost under half of the total, but the volume the magnitude is also. But what's interesting, stepping away from that, is kind of the trends over time. So specifically Britain First, as we've seen with other kind of far-right groups internationally, was kind of riffing off discontent around lockdown and broader kind of libertarian kind of calls to action. So we see kind of peaks in recruitment in the UK coming, kind of peaking at the end of different kind of UK-based lockdowns. And what's interesting, if you track the purple line, is that the kind of the most voluminous category is soft recruitment, which perhaps is not necessarily a surprise. Another group, Patriotic Alternative, similarly mastered things like gaming nights, movie nights, and socials online. So what we see as kind of a post-pandemic drop in recruitment terms, and as we see in the other groups, this is not necessarily unexpected because they're probably keen to shift their activities into the offline world more, and we see a drop in that online activity more broadly. So I'm sorry about the formatting of this slide. The text is a bit garbled. But the second most active group that we looked at was Five Pillars. And what we saw with them is actually there was greater kind of pre-pandemic recruitment terms, particularly a spike in relation to the EU referendum. And then subsequently the next year in the UK we had several Islamists or jihadi Salafi attacks happening in around kind of March, the early kind of part of that year. So we saw kind of peaks relating to that, some peaks more pronounced perhaps than during the pandemic, but some peaks during the pandemic again related to the imposition and the ending of different kind of lockdown measures. What's interesting here is that the hard recruitment entreaties tend to be around the same level, but overall calculating it a bit more kind of voluminous in terms of absolute numbers compared to kind of softer ones. And we see a noticeable kind of increase in soft recruitment following hard recruitment drives, which is interesting to think about how soft feeds into hard, because we're making very kind of crude categories here, but do we see soft recruitment as being a socialisation into kind of more harder ones? That's what we perhaps expect in terms of a spectrum or kind of continuum. Something which we'll develop more in a paper based off of this. So the final group that we looked at was the eco-radical group, which was Earth First. Again, on Facebook. We do have Twitter data, but we didn't have it ready. So we will include that. So we do some cross-platform analysis just to see if there's different functions for the different platforms, given their affordances. And what was interesting about this particular group is the order of magnitude was significantly less. Again, there's a sinking between soft and hard recruitment in the first year of the pandemic. But recruitment actually tails off during the pandemic periods. And the reason that we kind of came up with in terms of this in the paper is that the kind of eco-radical environment, the opportunity structure, was particularly closing for this group. It's a slightly older group than groups like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, or Insulate Britain, who largely kind of took over the mantle on some of the activities of the eco-radical milieu. In terms of examples, I've only got 5 minutes left to do this because I just wanted to explore the data a bit more qualitatively as well. Is interesting in terms of how they position their different kind of recruitment appeals within a broader kind of strategy. So 5 Pillars tends to lead on what Elisa has written about in terms of shock, demolish, rebuild strategy when recruiting new members. So exposing audiences to severe kind of moral shocks in their communications, demolishing kind of concepts that contrast with their ideological pillars, and then rebuilding these to what they consider as kind of correct kind of concepts or values. We can think of that in terms of the caliphate, for example, and other like what would generally maybe kind of societally be kind of beyond the Overton window. Higher recruitment in terms of specific posts was around kind of speaking engagements, fundraising and book launches rather than protest actions. 5 Pillars is more of a kind of media collective, I would say, but they do have synergies with other kind of actors within the Islamist milieu. Some people might be familiar with one of their editors, Dili Hussein, who's platformed some prominent white nationalists and neo-Nazis. So it's interesting, hybrid extremism there. And also we have kind of softer forms of recruitment, so sponsored walks, bike rides, kind of calls to action around kind of giving around iftar at Ramadan. So significance of this is around kind of consciousness raising, community building, and what they see as kind of the protection against the encroachment on the rights of the broader kind of Muslim diaspora in the West. In terms of Earth First, what's interesting about this particular group is it's a blueprint for a lot of the other actions which we've seen kind of later on with legacy groups. So I won't go too much into this. Apart from the more soft forms of recruitment, tend to involve things like moots, so kind of riffing off kind of pagan beliefs and ideology, gatherings and camps, and if you're interested, there's one happening in July near Shrewsbury. Final one, a bit close to home, I'm an expert on far-right, Elisa, on Islamist extremism, is Britain First. So this has changed slightly since I wrote the presentation because Britain First aren't standing in the general election. They had such a poor showing in the local elections that they're not really standing. But they broadly riff on what we've seen the development within the broader far-right, which is an influencer plus audience model. So online first, using offline events as kind of material in order to generate an almost kind of astroturf activity in the online space. So higher recruitment, we have some snapshots here from Telegram. So this one about activists needed, it's a fairly typical post. We also have kind of camps that happen, so Camp Britannia, which sounds, delightful. And they're always asking for money, a bit like Tommy Robinson. Significance, I think, of Britain First compared to the other groups is they have generally this election first footing, because they are a registered political party, but they also have this hybrid kind of community building kind of social movement. So they're like a party movement more than a party distinctly. Okay, so being told to wrap up, in terms of forms of recruitment, what was interesting is that overall we saw both hard and soft being used. With a radicalisation, we can see from some of the other studies that we've done of discourse around anti-authority or anti-elite sentiments during the pandemic. Soft recruitment tactics tended to be led by Britain First, but it was increasingly adopted, perhaps not so much by First, but Five Pillars as a way to kind of develop a cultic milieu, reach out to online audiences and socialise people for the cause. What's interesting is the pandemics did see kind of soft recruitment being increasingly relevant, but it since has dropped off slightly. So it is within the gamut of what's being used by these groups, but I think they used the pandemic moment as a way to kind of socialise and use slightly more creative, malign creativity to get people on board and align with their ideologies. Five Pillars presents an interesting outlier, as I've caveated before. It's not such a group per se, but it is representative of broader UK Islamist communications. And Elisa and I, just a little plug, we're hoping to do a project looking at extremist news sharing. So watch this space, and that's a wrap.